Hey y'all, welcome to Bible study. We are jumping right into Acts chapter 25, which opens with the new Governor Porcius Festus. Verse 1 tells us that after just 3 days of him being in this position, he decides to take a trip to Jerusalem. He gets to Jerusalem, and in verse 2, Ananias, the high priest, and some of the Jewish leaders immediately want to talk about Paul. Verse 3 said they asked Festus, "Can you do us a favor? Can you please send Paul to Jerusalem so we can resolve our legal matters?" But verse 3 lets us know that they had no resolution in mind, because they were going to be laying weights in the way to kill him. Now remember, the end of chapter 24 let us know that Paul had been under house arrest in Caesarea for 2 years. How y'all still seething with anger after 2 years? And these were religious leaders, people who claimed to serve the one true living God, and who also claimed to be defending God and his word. Please tell me, where in his word does he say that unforgiveness and murder are acceptable? Let me tell you, being religious does not equal having a relationship with God. You can be religious and know the word, but not apply the word. But haven't we all been there? Well, if I'm honest, I've been there, where I'm so angry over something that someone has done that I just can't let it go. When you are in relationship with Jesus Christ, you understand that you have to let it go. It's not okay to just know the word. The word has to be applied to our behavior and to the way we do everything. But in verse 4 and 5, Festus says, "No, I'm not going to do that favor for you." Divine protection. Festus told them, "Whoever of you are available to come back with me to Caesarea are welcome to do so. And we'll reopen this case, hear all the facts, review all the evidence, and see what wickedness Paul is actually guilty of." So about 10 days later, he gets back to Caesarea, and the first thing on the agenda is Paul's case. He calls him down for yet another trial. And verse 7 says, "And when he, Paul, was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about, and laid many and grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove." 2 years later, they still can't prove anything. Paul speaks, and then Festus asks him in verse 9, "Do you want to go back to Jerusalem to continue this trial there?" Paul was like, no. Paul knows for these religious leaders, it is not about a fair trial. He's like, "I'm not playing with these people. Bring me to Caesar." And in verse 12, Festus says, "And to Caesar you shall go." Then in verse 13, after a few days passed, King Agrippa and his wife came to visit Governor Festus. Festus decides to discuss Paul's case with King Agrippa and gives him a rundown of what has happened. Verses 18 and 19 are very interesting to me. We get a little bit of insight on Festus from these verses. Let me read them to you. "Against whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought none accusation of such things as I supposed, but had certain questions against him of their own superstition, and of one Jesus, which was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive." These religious leaders had to be carrying on terribly, because Festus is like, "I thought when I heard the case that it was going to be something crazy that Paul did." But they're arguing about their own superstitions about some Jesus who died, but Paul said is alive. The language here is implying that Festus has no idea who Jesus is. He never heard about Jesus. Can I tell you that we cannot assume that what is common knowledge to us as believers, that everyone knows. We have to get out there and tell people about Jesus. The world around us is dying without hearing about him. And it's our job to be witnesses. That's what Jesus commanded. Don't assume nobody knows anything. Just tell everybody about Jesus. Then in verse 22, after King Agrippa heard what Governor Festus had run down for him, he said, "Let me hear the case." And the next day, Governor Festus gathered everyone together with Paul. And I love what he said in verse 25. "I found he had committed nothing worthy of death, and that he himself has appealed to Augustus. I have determined to send him." Remember when the chief captain was sending Paul to the previous governor, Governor Felix? He wrote a letter to accompany Paul. Well, Governor Festus had to write a letter as well to accompany Paul to Caesar. And in verse 26, he says, "Of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord." And in the final verse, he said, "For it seemeth to me unreasonable to send a prisoner, and not withal to signify the crimes laid against him." Governor Festus could not figure out an actual criminal offense because there wasn't one. So now King Agrippa is going to hear the case, and that's a wrap on Acts chapter 25. I'll be back with Acts chapter 26, and we'll discuss what happens next.